Alright, at number 10 we have a mass hallucination. This one was posted by a nurse that goes by RN_waitress on Reddit. During a 2012 outbreak of fungal meningitis, the acute care floor she was working on had at least 10 to 15 meningitis patients. The floor itself has a capacity of 20. Many of these meningitis patients were having the same hallucinations. The nurse wrote on Reddit that they experienced children in the corners of their rooms and auditory hallucinations of religious music. Now, if you think this was a prank being played by sick patients, then think again. All of the patients were in isolation with no shared rooms and no communication between one another. So what do you think caused it? Specific parts of the brain the fungal infection was affecting, or was it something else?
Coming in at number 9 is the bloodbath. Now this one is gruesome and shared by a user called Paravel. So they shared that they were working their regular night shift in a bone marrow transplant unit with another nurse. They had 5 patients, and as the other nurse was coming out of room 4, she shared that the patient in there had died a very gruesome death. He was slated and approved to go home, but that same night, the nurses heard the sound of someone falling. They went in to check on him and saw nothing but blood. The man had pulled out his own central line, and there was blood everywhere, like it was a bloodbath, Game of Thrones Red Wedding style. He died right there and then, and no one knew why he did it. He was literally free to go. But get this, a few weeks later, a little old lady gets moved into that same room, and she asks if anyone had died in there. The nurse brushed it off, saying people die in the hospital all the time, but the old lady replied by saying, no, I think a young guy died in here because he's talking to me right now. Now this woman also has a central line, and later that night, the nurse goes in to check on her. Again, an utter bloodbath. Her central line had been cut. Not pulled like the other guy, it was proper cut. There was no scissors in the room, and all the lady said was he did it. Right, enough of that.
Next at number 8, we have false hope. This one comes from an ER nurse who spoke from a now deleted account on Reddit. She had an old lady stay in the ER overnight that was near death. They saw the signs: irregular breath, barely responsive, pale and cool, so they turned the lights down and kept an eye on her monitor. They searched and couldn't find any family, and then on top of that, she was a DNR, do not resuscitate. So the writer says they were basically waiting for her to die. She was close. And then, an hour later, all of a sudden, she's standing at the door of her room with all of her clothes back on, just there. Apparently, she was hungry, so they got her food, and while she ate, the old woman talked to the staff a little bit in her room, but then she told her nurse she was tired and wanted to lie back down. Within 30 minutes, she was dead. This surge of energy is called rallying before death, and it's not uncommon, but it's super unnerving, just like this Redditor said, and it's just unnerving to see so much life in a person before death. Scary.
Now at number 7 is Speak Back to Me. Now this story comes from a travel nurse called Courtney, and if you don't know what a travel nurse is, it's basically a nurse that travels across the country and works at a new hospital every 13 weeks. Now Courtney shared that she was working at an ICU at the time, and she had a patient there that would only repeat what was said to her and say nothing else. Now that day Courtney was with her all night, and she started telling her all the ways she had apparently died, saying things like, I died because I took too much insulin, I died because of narcotic overdose, I died on a sunny Sunday afternoon, and so on. Now Courtney kind of brushed it all off as the patient was troubled, but then she looked up at the ceiling and said they're all still here. At that point Courtney was like, I'm gonna up the hell out of here, and ran out of the room. If that was me, I'd be like, medicate honey, I'm not here to be hearing you talk about the ghosts of deaths past, I'm here to do my job and then leave. She further shared that once she was caring for a blind patient who continuously asked her what time it was all night. She left and came back a while later to check in on her, and all the patient said was it's the witching hour. Court looked at the time, saw it was 3:33 AM and walked out, and hopefully never returned, because I sure damn would have not.
Alright, on to number 6, A Shriek and a Goat Man. Now, this isn't the shrieking goat like that Taylor Swift cover. This is a story that comes from the mother of Danger Moose, or Danger MUUS, on Reddit. She was on night shift, the mother, in a hospital in Arizona going room to room when an old lady told her about a goat man trying to get through the doors. This woman was an insomniac, so the mother didn't think anything of it. Then, a blood-curdling shriek rang out that people heard all around the hospital. People were freaked out, and then a few looked out the windows where they found hoof marks by the doors and windows, with no trails leading to or from them. That insomniac clearly knew something was up, and it must have been the goat man causing that shriek, right? Either himself or through nefarious means? Like,
Filling our number 5 slot is the hallucination. Now this one's from Reddit user Whites42 who worked as an ICU nurse. She shared that a woman in her 20s had come in with serious cardiac abnormalities and then abruptly went into respiratory distress. She was put on a ventilator and was sedated just enough to keep her lucid. She could nod to answer questions, and that's all they really needed from her at the time. Now a few nights later, the patient in the room next to her has died, but the body was yet to be taken to the morgue. Now the girl's room door was closed and the male patient's curtain was drawn, so they never met nor did they see each other. The nurse went to check in on the woman and she looked like she was about to die, like she was in pure panic mode, and the nurse asked her if she was cold, were you in pain, are you warm, and she said no to everything. She then asked if she saw something and she started nodding aggressively. And mind you, just because she was sedated that doesn't mean she was hallucinating, like she wasn't. She started probing and asking questions to try and figure out what she was seeing, and she found out that the patient was seeing a Caucasian bald man missing his left arm. The nurse then freaked out when she realized the patient was seeing the ghost of the man who had died in the room next to her without ever actually seeing him. Okay.
At number 4, followed by death. This comes from another deleted account on Reddit. A staff member at a skilled nursing facility was typically working in the Alzheimer's ward and had a troubling string of experiences. First, they heard someone shuffle behind them, and then they feel someone put a hand on their shoulder while they're in a linen closet. So when they turn around, they see no one there and the door is still closed, so it was a bit freaky. Then another lady began to complain to them for 2 weeks straight every night that a man was coming into her room at night. That being in the Alzheimer's ward, the author of this post didn't take it too seriously, saying they'd check in on her throughout the night. At the end of the 2 weeks of complaining, the staff member asked what the man looked like, just out of curiosity. The woman said, "He's real handsome and wears a black suit. Oh, he's right behind you now, honey," which justifiably freaked the writer of this story out. There was no one behind them, and as for the old lady, she died the next night in her sleep. So was the person in the suit death following them? Is that what they felt with their hand on the shoulder on the hand? I leave it to you.
At number 3 is the Grim Reaper. Now this one's from Redditor Scary Kerry 91476, and boy, oh boy, are you guys not ready for this one. So Kerry is an intensive care nurse, and she shared that back in 1999, she was in a 12-bedded ITU in London. She was in charge of the nurses station, and she looked up to see a man coming through the double doors of the unit. And that image just stuck in her mind even 20 years later. It was like he had been plucked out of 1974 and dropped into 1999. He was wearing cord pants, a check shirt with a patterned tank top on top, and platform shoes. He looked about 30 years old, and he just very calmly walked towards the bay of patients. Now Kerry had no idea who he was, so she asked him, and he responded by nodding and then just continued walking. Alright then. He went and stopped at the end of a patient's bed and just looked at them. He didn't touch them, there was no contact, he just made eye contact. The patient was sick but very stable, but as the man was looking at them, they suddenly started deteriorating in front of Kerry's eyes. Staff rushed over to assist him, and they were just acting like the man wasn't even there. And with that being said, he exited as calmly as he had come in. The patient ended up dying, and Kerry asked the assisting staff who the man was, and none of them had even seen him or remembered any man even walking in that day. So Kerry thoroughly believed that she saw the Grim Reaper at work that day. And Kerry, I bloody agree with you.
At number 2, we have a C-section nightmare. It comes from P as in Peter on Reddit, who had a traumatizing experience while getting a C-section. She said that when the doctors were preparing to close her, she had blood splash on her face. Her own blood. She wrote that one of the doctors working on her must have dropped one of her organs. Like, hello? This woman was simultaneously giving life and being reminded that hers is fragile. She at least had a good attitude about it, because she said her family got their money's worth from the anesthesiologist who wiped the blood from her face and glasses. But that's an organ falling and splash. I don't know how they are not super traumatized by this, but that's the miracle of life, ladies and gentlemen.
And last but not least, at our number 1 spot is the repetition. Now this one's from Redditor Cam Brewer, who was a 4th year nursing student when this happened to them. She was sitting for a 28-year-old woman who was going through alcohol withdrawal, and it was the 3rd day, which is scientifically the worst. And sitting is basically when you sit by a patient that could be dangerous to themselves or others, and this woman was fully restrained, like hands and feet were bound to the bed. She was shouting racial slurs at the nurse and spitting on on her and after a while started straight up hallucinating. She thought she was in her car driving with her 2 kids in the back, and she kept begging the nurse to take the wheel. She then explained the car crash in vivid detail, saying that her son had died. She kept crying and apologizing and repeatedly kept asking the nurse to hand her the body of her dead son. She was sedated, and when that wore off, the same hallucinations happened again. The same scenario happened 8 times in this woman's 12-hour shift, and after hearing it enough times, she realized it wasn't a hallucination at all. This was something that she had actually done but was replaying in her mind in her delirious state. Can you imagine being so delirious that you're hallucinating a car crash where you killed your 7-year-old son, but it's not hallucination, it's real? Nope.
Starting us off at number 10 is underwater. Jade Raven on Reddit wrote about a 9-year-old that was in child psych as an acute inpatient. The reason? The mother of the child refused to allow them to have another lollipop, and his response was far from normal. He calmly and purposefully drowned a toddler. The Redditor wrote that there was no spark of anything in that 9-year-old's eyes. No life, no humanity, it was stark cold, terrifying. So basically, an emotionally attached toddler felt detached from the actions that sent another kid to their end. Next at number 9 is porphyria. So Deviana Morgan on Reddit shared her mother's experience since her mother had worked in mental institutions previously. She even worked at a large and well-known asylum before it shut down apparently. One patient where she worked was a woman who thought she was something like a vampire. Because of this, she was limited to being allowed out only 1 hour per day. And even during this time, they had used safety precautions because she already killed at least 1 worker at the hospital before they made these changes. When she asked for more information about the patient, she was told by the others that the patient had killed at least 2 of her children. She also wounded another and her husband. The explanation she received was that the patient had a physical condition called porphyria that made her crave blood. By the time the workers or doctors had figured out she had a physical condition, the patient couldn't deal with the existing guilt and grief she already had to deal with. Next at number 8 is with bare hands. So Never Got Challenger was another Redditor that's mom was a nurse. During her mom's time in the neuropsychiatric ward while in grad school, she had one terrifying experience that stuck with her. It happened during a routine room check on night shift. All the patient's doors should have been closed, but after rounding a corner, she saw an open door. And on the floor were a staff member's legs sticking out. When she got to the room, she saw why the staff member was downed. The patient in the room was a woman with severe postpartum psychiatric disorder, and she had gouged out both of her eyes with her bare hands. She was just sitting there, cross-legged, holding her eyes in her palms. The first staff member to find her like that had a heart attack, and the mother who told the story said she performed CPR on the downed staff member. And while she did that, the patient just sat calmly, holding her eyes. On to number 7, we have slicing. This story comes from Huge Pianist on Reddit who worked at a facility. The hospital had a young woman in their custody with a number of issues. On her first night, she was found during a routine check laying in a puddle of her own blood. She had been slicing the skin around her shin with her fingernails and was in the process of pulling her skin up her leg. Try not to picture it. She also had a nightly ritual. She ran between walls in her rooms and touched them in a crucifix pattern. It would go on for hours until she sat on her bed and went to sleep. There was one night though when her running was more frantic. She was screaming in her room late into the night. The staff went to check on her and reported that she stood in the doorway with a smile. The staff asked what was wrong and Jane replied, "What makes you think you were speaking to Jane?" Creepy. On to number 6, water cure. At the Topeka Asylum for the Insane in 1903, the attendants used torture under the direction of head staff. It was called a water cure against insane women at the asylum. Those who disobeyed Miss Houston, the head of staff, would have a sheet thrown over their head by attendants and be pulled down to the floor. Miss Houston would then pour water out of a pan onto the face in rapid succession until the patient obeyed orders. It was also known as simulated drowning and also sounds similar to waterboarding. Moving on to number 5, we have what if. So a Redditor that goes by Cromulent shared their story of a conversation they had with a man who was confined to a mental health facility. Cromulent said that even though the man was delusional, he was very smart as well. They were discussing how some people in mental institutions think the CIA or other agencies have put microchips in their head or other ideas. The man was arguing why the claim shouldn't be dismissed. He said, "It's precisely because such delusions are so common that mental patients make the best test subjects." And it's pretty accurate. The subjects are stuck in one place, constantly observed, and their concerns aren't taken seriously. How could someone know? Imagine being in a place where people trap you there for your own safety, and refusing their rules leads to more isolation. And then add onto that the idea that you can't trust your own thoughts. It's a scary place to be. Next at number 4 is inside. This one comes from Atheist Comic. There was a patient with severe brain damage that was kept locked in a padded cell naked. She wasn't given access to anything that she could put in her mouth. This is because she would try to eat it every single time. She would eat anything. The examples given were styrofoam cups, plastic cutlery, and plates. Then one time on a full moon, she snuck a plastic spoon from a tray on the way to the bathroom, and with it she plucked one of her eyes out. This was despite her restraints and attendants, and in the end, they found the eyeball in her stomach. As I said, she ate everything. Next up at number 3, hide the knives. A tech in psych years ago shared their experience too. They met a 7-year-old kid who was sent there because the mother was afraid of her own son. She kept finding mutilated animals in their backyard, and neighbors' pets were disappearing. Also, the young boy hid knives around the house and then lied about it to his mom. Then, if they ever had an argument, the boy would get violent and threaten to kill his mother. She would also wake up to him standing beside her bed and staring at her, and so she set up locks on her bedroom door after that. She brought him in after she discovered over 50 knives hidden under his mattress. The people in the hospital described him as robotic in the way he talked. It was as if he was saying what he expected people were wanting to hear. He looked through people, not at them. The person who posted this story believes they met a 7-year-old psychopath. At number 2, teacher. So as a pharmacy tech, one of this person's job was to dispense patients' medications. As a 5'2" woman, just like me, she was accompanied by either a male nurse or a security guard. That was for safety reasons. But other than a death grip on her arm or a manic outburst every once in a while, she didn't face many issues. There was one 9-year-old boy who was always polite to her and found something to compliment about her every single time they met. He was also well-spoken and nice, so she began to look forward to saying hi to him, and that was until other female nurses saw. They asked if she was out of her mind. Apparently, when he was in kindergarten, he grew very attached to his young female teacher. He began calling her mom and left notes saying he wished he was her son. His home life was normal, and the teacher said she couldn't be his mom because that would hurt his real mom's feelings. He already had a good mom. So he went home and killed his own mother in her sleep by cutting her throat. And this was also his teacher could be his mom. The female staff at the hospital then, after knowing that story, had a general rule of not interacting with him too much to prevent any kind of attachment from forming. At number 1 is cockroach. So this one is not for the faint of heart. Just warning you. One person's dad told them a story of a time he pulled a cockroach out of someone's tongue. What the doctors assume happened is that the patient ate roach eggs along with something else that cut their tongue. This unique situation let the egg embed itself in the tongue and hatch there. So the person was admitted with a horrible looking tongue that needed to be dissected so the doctor could take out a still squirming cockroach.
Starting off this countdown, we have the teeth. The first patient on this list did something so gruesome to herself that you may just want to stop eating for a second while I tell the story. So according to the nurse that shared this story, this patient was known for inflicting harm on herself. She was known to rip out all of her hair till there was none left on her head or body. That was one of her habits. One day when they went to go check up on her, they found her with blood all over the floor and blood coming out of her mouth. The patient had pulled out most of her teeth, some of which she actually swallowed. The image of her just sitting in her room, bloody teeth surrounding her, has haunted the nurse ever since. Like, ow! And at number 9, we have the appetite. So this next patient was placed into a hospital after suffering severe brain damage. She was so bad that she would tend to eat anything around her. She has eaten styrofoam cups, plastic cutlery, plates, and even her clothes. As a result, she was kept in a padded cell with absolutely nothing in it, or else she would try to eat it. One night though, she plucked out one of her eyes. When nurses found her, they wondered where the eye had went. But I'm sure you know where this is going. They later found that she had eaten her own eyeball. This isn't fake, guys. These are real stories. Coming in at number 8, we have Jane. According to this person that shared the story, Jane was a young lady that had a lot going on, but she wasn't diagnosed yet. The first night at the facility, the staff found Jane in her room in a puddle of blood. Turns out that Jane was picking at the skin on her legs. She managed to pull her skin up on her leg and was degloving her own calf. Jane also had other strange habits. Every night before bed, she would perform the same ritual. She would run from wall to wall, touching them in a crucifix pattern. She would do this for hours before finally going to bed. But one night, a worker heard Jane screaming late at night. When he went to go check in on her, she was standing at the doorway smiling. When the staff said, "Jane, what's wrong?" she replied with, "What makes you think you're speaking to Jane?" Yeah, no, that's possession. Jane is gone. that's the devil you're talking to. In our 7th spot, we have the threat. Honestly, if I worked at any of these places, I don't think I would ever sleep again, especially after hearing this next story. So this next individual worked at a hospital, particularly with older patients. It was around 2:30 in the morning and the staff was going around making sure all the patients were still in their rooms sleeping. But when they approached the room of an 83-year-old woman, they found her sitting straight up in her bed, just staring at the wall. They walked into the room and told her to lie back down and to go to sleep. Then she turned around and said, "They're coming for you, dear." Then she started laughing, like she let out an evil cackle. Afterwards, she lied back down and said, "I'm going to miss you when they take you." Yeah, I wouldn't sleep anymore if that happened to me. Sleep? Yeah, we don't know her. Moving on, number 6, we have the photos. So this story was posted on Reddit by the user Ping. She told the story on behalf of her sister, who is the director of a psychiatric hospital. According to her sister, one of her patients would cut open her arms, legs, and torso. But wait, it gets worse. After doing so, she would take photos of her family and place them under her skin and then close the skin around it. I seriously don't know how the workers do it. Like, I would be traumatized if I saw someone do that. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with the biter. Reddit user OmniChronos shared the story of one of her patients. So she worked at a juvenile psych unit, and one of the patients she had was very suicidal and distraught. Because of this, she would tend to bite chunks of skin and flesh out of her own shoulder. She had to be placed in restraints and her head strapped back because of this. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Apparently 3 years later, she was on a bus headed to an interview for a graduate psych program. While on the bus, she was approached by a nicely dressed girl. The girl asked her if she worked at a psych unit. She then went on to say that she was the girl that used to bite the skin off of her shoulders. She was doing completely fine now. Like, that's amazing. I'm so happy that the girl is doing fine. Also, it's pretty cool how they just randomly bumped into each other like 3 years later. In our 4th spot, we have the lost identity. This story starts off with a pretty dark backstory. So this next individual worked at the dental clinic of a psychiatric hospital. One of the patients that she will never forget is a man named Terry. Here's where it gets dark. When Terry was young, he witnessed his sister get killed by their stepfather. As soon as this happened, Terry took on the personality of his sister. He was 100% convinced that he was her. As a result, he would often dress like her. Even now, as a grown man, he would wear little girls' clothing. He would also cut pictures out of little girls and attach them to a string in which he would wear around his neck, like a necklace. Even though the pictures of the girls were random and from magazines, he was convinced that they were his friends. Terry was never violent at all. He was just simply a boy who saw a tragic death at a young age that literally broke him. And that makes me so sad. Poor Terry. Moving on to number 3, we have the carvings in the wall. This next worker was in charge of keeping an eye on a group of certain patients. One of the patients was a pretty shy guy named Tom. He had trouble speaking, so he often would just not speak at all. He had been in the hospital for about a month now and would often keep to himself. What's weird is that he would often sleep on the floor under his bed. Nurses just assumed he might be frightened and that he felt safer sleeping under his bed, so they allowed him to do so. One morning though, the nurse went to check on Tom and found him staring at the wall. His hands were covered in blood. Some of his fingernails were missing. They removed Tom from his room and she inspected the room to see what went down. The nurse followed the trail of blood to under his bed. When she moved the bed, she was horrified at what she saw. Tom had carved a bunch of drawings into the wall with his fingernails. The drawings were satanic. The freakiest part? Tom had written, "He's coming," on the wall, in his blood. Who's coming? The devil, clearly, so get out of there. In our 2nd spot, we have the bones. Just when you thought this list couldn't get any darker, we got this story. Literally, I was scripting this while eating mac and cheese and wrong decision, stop eating. So this next patient had a tendency to harm himself. In particular, his habit was to break his own bones. Now, you would think that would be extremely painful, but for some reason, to him, it wasn't. In fact, he has broken his left arm more than 3 times over the years. Basically, as soon as it heals, he purposely breaks it again. And as a result, his left arm barely functions. When asked why he does this, he told the workers he loves the sounds of bones breaking. He also always has broken fingers and toes. He's just constantly snapping and breaking his bones. Now they have restrained him so that he can't harm himself. But still, I could never imagine breaking my own bones on purpose. It's like the scene in The Orphan when she like puts her arm in the if you've seen that movie, you know what I'm talking about. And in our number 1 spot, we have the eyes. Again, if you're eating something, maybe just put your food away. Just wait until this video's done. Believe me, you won't have an appetite after this. So this story was told by a daughter whose mom worked at a neuropsychiatric ward. One night while she was doing the room checks, she came across a very horrific scene. She turned the corner and saw that a staff member was collapsed on the floor. She immediately started doing CPR and called for help. The staff member had suffered a heart attack after seeing what the patient had done. The patient, who suffered from severe postpartum psychiatric disorder, was just sitting on the floor with her own eyes in her hand. Yeah, she gouged out her own eyes and was just holding them. And while the mom was frantically trying to save her coworker's life, the patient just sat there calmly, smiling, holding her eyes.